Most people in the UK think they know every Austin ever made, from the humble Mini to the stately Westminster. But what if I told you there's an Austin so rare, so secret, that even lifelong British car enthusiasts have never heard of it? A car that wasn't built in Longbridge or Cowley, but thousands of miles away in the blazing sun of Australia. A car that carried British DNA but Australian guts, and one that, if fate had been kinder, might have saved the Austin name from disaster. This is the Austin Kimberley, the forgotten British sedan that could have rewritten motoring history. And trust me, the secrets buried under its bonnet will make you question how British Leyland ever ran its empire. So stick around, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why this mysterious sedan was silenced, and how close it came to changing everything. Oh, and before we go deeper down this rabbit hole of forgotten engineering genius, smash that subscribe button like you're slamming a stubborn Austin door in the middle of winter. Let's get started. The Austin Kimberley story begins not in England's Midlands, but in Australia in the late 1960s. A time when British Leyland was expanding globally, desperately trying to stay relevant in an era of Japanese innovation and European precision. Now, here's the twist. While British Leyland in the UK was drowning in strikes and management chaos, the Australian division, Leyland Australia, was quietly thriving. They had freedom, they had talent, and most importantly, they had vision. In 1968, they kicked off Project X6, an ambitious plan to build a new, bigger, more refined car to replace the quirky Austin 1800, affectionately nicknamed the Land Crab. The 1800 had its fans for sure, especially engineers who loved its robust suspension and roomy interior, but to ordinary drivers it looked, well, like a crab on wheels. Leyland Australia wanted something more, something that looked modern, felt premium, and could handle the rugged Australian outback and the city streets of Sydney. So they designed the Austin Kimberley and its twin, the Austin Tasman, cars that were proudly Australian but carried that prestigious British Austin badge. Imagine that for a moment, a car that wore British heritage on the outside but was powered by Aussie ingenuity underneath. And this decision alone would lead to one of the most fascinating automotive stories most UK drivers never got to hear. Because while the Kimberley was setting standards in the Southern Hemisphere, British Leyland's executives back home were pretending it didn't even exist. And the reason why is mind-blowing. Let's talk about looks. Because if there's one thing the Kimberley nailed, it was design. Gone were the bulbous, awkward lines of the 1800. The Kimberley was clean, sharp, and sophisticated. And that's where the trouble began. A classic British Leyland power struggle that would doom the Kimberley before it ever had a chance to prove itself globally. We'll get to that battle next. And trust me, it's one of those you couldn't make this up corporate stories. By the early 1970s, British Leyland was an empire crumbling from within. There were too many brands, too many boardrooms, and too little common sense. Austin wanted to build family sedans. Triumph wanted sporty ones. Rover thought they were royalty. And MG just wanted to go racing. Amidst all that noise, Leyland Australia quietly launched the Kimberley, a car that ironically solved many of the problems that British Leyland's UK engineers were still struggling with. But when executives in London saw the Kimberley's specs and test reports, they didn't celebrate. They panicked. Why? Because it made their own upcoming model, the Austin 2200, look outdated before it even reached production. So, instead of learning from their Australian branch, they ignored it.
The Kimberley wasn't officially imported to the UK, wasn't advertised in Europe, and was never given the praise it deserved. It was like a family member with too much talent, quietly hidden so others wouldn't look bad. Meanwhile, in Australia, drivers were impressed. The Kimberley handled the country's tough terrain gracefully. Its hydroelastic suspension soaked up bumps with ease. And the car's interior comfort made long-distance driving genuinely enjoyable. Owners called it the gentleman's cruiser. But back in the UK, most Austin fans had no clue such a car even existed. But before the Kimberley faded into history, it had one last fight, a final chapter that's both inspiring and heartbreaking. Cars like the Honda Accord, Nissan Bluebird, and even the first front-drive GM models all benefited from similar concepts. By 1974, the dream began to crumble. British Leyland's financial meltdown hit every corner of its empire, and the Australian division was no exception. Rising fuel prices, stricter emissions laws, and corporate neglect led to declining sales. Even though the Kimberley had loyal owners, the writing was on the wall. British Leyland had no funds to modernise the car or market it properly. And with competition heating up from Holden, Ford, and the fast-rising Japanese brands like Datsun and Toyota, the Kimberley quickly looked outdated. Production limped on for a few short years before the entire Leyland Australia operation was shuttered in 1975. Just like that, poof, gone. No grand farewell, no collector's edition, not even a proper press release. Only about 8,000 Kimberleys were ever built, and most remained in Australia and New Zealand. A handful made it to the UK as private imports, and those few examples became whisper-level legends among collectors. Yet, for all its short life, the Kimberley represented something magical, a glimpse of what British engineering could have been if it had been allowed to evolve beyond bureaucracy. Because, make no mistake, this car wasn't just an Aussie oddball. It was a technological bridge between the old British way of building cars and the modern global approach that came decades later. And the proof of that is in what happened next. The hidden influence the Kimberley had long after its demise. Today, the surviving Kimberleys are cherished by enthusiasts. They're a rare sight. But when you find one, you're looking at the last breath of unfiltered engineering creativity from within the Austin nameplate. And that corporate silence, that refusal to admit something brilliant came from outside the UK, was the beginning of the end. You see, even though the Kimberley vanished, its ideas didn't. The transverse inline-six layout and modular engine concept inspired later engineers within British Leyland and beyond. The Rover SD1, introduced in 1976, carried echoes of the Kimberley's front-engine refinement and spacious practicality. And that front-wheel drive thinking, that obsession with maximizing cabin space, became the backbone of countless family sedans that followed. Even funnier, a few ex-Leyland Australia engineers later went on to work for Holden and Nissan in Australia, bringing with them the same design philosophies they'd learned from the Kimberley project. So, in a strange twist, the ghost of the Kimberley helped shape cars that would later compete against British imports on the global stage. And the best part? Many of its ideas, modular engines, space-saving layouts, comfort-focused designs, are exactly what modern manufacturers still chase today. So even though it's forgotten in the UK, the Kimberley's DNA quietly lives on in ways few ever realise. The Austin Kimberley wasn't just another obscure car. It was proof that innovation can bloom even in the harshest conditions, in this case thousands of miles from home.
It showed that British heritage and Australian ingenuity could blend to create something truly special. But it also exposed how corporate pride and poor communication can bury greatness before the world ever sees it. So the next time someone says every British car from the 1970s was unreliable or uninspired, tell them about the Kimberley. Tell them about the Austin that dared to be different. It may not have saved British leyland, but it did leave behind lessons. Lessons about innovation, ambition, and the courage to build something bold even when no one's watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Britain's most underrated automotive secrets, make sure to subscribe to AbTech Lab, because we've got more stories coming that'll make you fall in love with forgotten machines all over again. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, and keep your engines running smoother than a well-tuned Austin Kimberley.